All right, my clock says it's shortly after 4 o'clock, so we're going to get started with this Q&A with MSBA regarding the Waconia Superintendent Search. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your presence. My name is Barb Dorn. I'm the Director of Leadership Development and Executive Search at MSBA. I work exclusively in the areas of superintendent search and superintendent evaluation. Over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to focus exclusively on my work in superintendent search, and we look forward to answering all the questions you might have about the upcoming search in Waconia Public Schools. Also with me today are two MSBA staffers. Jameson Silman is our technology guru. JJ will place his contact information in the chat box, so if for any reason you have issues with the technology over the course of the session, please reach out to JJ and he'll make sure you're able to participate. JJ will also be screen sharing some documents for us over the course of the session this afternoon. Also with us is John Ward, a member of MSBA's search team. John is going to be monitoring the chat box and sharing with me any questions that have come in live during the session. Thank you, John, for being with us. I appreciate your help this afternoon monitoring those questions that are coming in from folks during the live session. So a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. These sessions typically last about 30 to 45 minutes. However, we will stay until 5 o'clock if there are questions that have not yet been answered. We do want to be careful with your time, however, and so we will conclude within the hour. But again, we want to make sure that we're answering your questions, so continue to submit them, and we'll get as many in as we can prior to 5 o'clock if we're not done sooner than that. You've noticed, I'm sure, that you are muted. That is intentional. If you have questions for us today, please type those in the chat box. They will be anonymous, and so John will be monitoring those. He may paraphrase questions. If there are questions coming in there that are very similar to one another, we don't want to duplicate time reading questions that are around the same general topic. So John may paraphrase those. We'll also be doing those with questions that came in advance of the session as well. Also, as I'm sure you can understand, we won't be sharing any questions that contain names. So if you have a question regarding staff or a candidate or school board members or community members, we will not be sharing questions that contain names, nor, of course, are we able to share any questions that may be inappropriate, as I'm sure that you can understand. So thank you very much for your assistance with that. The reason for the session, I always want to be clear about what we're doing here today. It's important to the school board in Waconia that all stakeholders have access to accurate and transparent information regarding the superintendent search. Clarity of expectations is really important. And so managing expectations from the beginning is one of the things that we try to do through these Q&A sessions to assure that people know exactly what's going to happen, when is it going to happen, why is it going to happen, and where can I go for more information about the search process. So that's the purpose of today's Q&A session. It is being recorded, as I'm sure you noticed when you logged on, and that's because people have very busy schedule. We know it's very difficult for people to find time in their day to sit through a half-hour to a 1-hour session about the superintendent search. So the session is being recorded. We will provide that link to the district tomorrow afternoon if YouTube uploads it quickly enough for us. And that recording link will be available on the district website for the duration of the search. So please rewatch this if you're watching this live, and please tell people who are not able to be here today during the live session to go to the district website and to watch this Q&A to get their questions answered. All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it. So really, there's two parts to the session today. The first part is going to be an informational overview. We'll cover in general the big picture of superintendent search, the statutes that drive superintendent search, and then we'll also speak specifically to the process in Waconia. We're going to be sharing the timeline, the vacancy brochure, and the survey information. So we want specific information being shared today, and that's where JJ is going to screen share some things for me. The second part will be your questions, and I want to thank everyone who submitted questions in advance through that document. We had a lot of participation and we welcomed all of them, so thank you for doing that. Also, again, feel free to type them in during the session today. John will be monitoring those. If it is something that has already been asked in advance, I will be addressing those. So if your question isn't answered exactly the way that you worded it, please know we're just very aware with the volume of questions that we received. We want to dump them into categories to answer questions that way, because there are several in the same area of questioning. I guess that's about it. Those are the two things I want to make sure we cover today. I'm just going to dive right in. The first thing I want to talk about is superintendent search in general. And when we talk about superintendent search at MSBA, we want to say it's both an art and a science. Now, the art comes into play in terms of crafting a leadership profile, designing the vacancy brochure, marketing the position, creating interview questions that reflect the hiring criteria, interviewing and really listening to what the candidates are saying. There's a lot of nuances and subtleties to a superintendent search. And so that's what we call the art part of what we do. The science side comes into play because it's driven by two state statutes. That is the Open Meeting Law and the Government Data Practices Act. Now, the open meeting law, for example, requires that every step of the superintendent search process be conducted in an open meeting. The school board cannot close the meeting for any purposes during the superintendent search. So every part of it, such as selecting the finalists, interviewing the candidates, deliberating who to move on to the second round, deliberating who it is they're going to make an offer to, all of that is done in the public. Now, that needs to be balanced with the Government Data Practices Act, which is the data privacy law. For example, when the school board is debating who are you going to bring in as finalists, all of those applicant names are private data. So they'll be charged with discussing private data in a public forum. MSBA will work very carefully with the school board to ensure that they stay within the lane and the bounds of state statutes. When that time comes, they'll be speaking about candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, because they cannot reveal any identifying information. They will not be sharing where someone has worked. Well, candidate A has been a principal in Acme School District for 10 years. They cannot share that level of detail. Anyone with Google can figure out who they're speaking about. And applicant names are private data. So at the conclusion of that meeting, they will make a motion to interview candidates A, B, and C. When that motion passes, we will then read those names out loud for the first time of the finalists. State statute says that a finalist is defined as an individual who's selected to be interviewed by the school board. All other applicant names will remain private forever. So the school board is used to handling confidential information, and so they will not be sharing any more information about that. But that's just one example where the open meeting law and the data privacy laws need to be balanced in a superintendent search. So that's all I'm going to say about those two things, the very big picture of superintendent search. I'll pause for just a moment before we get into the specifics about the Waconia search. John, are there any questions in the chat box I should address yet?
Not in the chat box, no.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, JJ, if you could please screen share the timeline for the Waconia search. We're going to talk about this first. Now, I do want to let folks know that this information is on the district website. Paul David is doing a wonderful job of keeping the district website current with information about the search process as it unfolds. So please, if you want to see this again, or you want to see the vacancy brochure, the stakeholder survey, those sorts of things, please do go to the district website. He's doing a very wonderful job with that. Now on the timeline, I'm going to point out the second line there. It says March 18th to April 3rd. That is the stakeholder survey. That survey is currently open. It is open for 10 more days, and it will close at midnight on April 3rd. And I'm going to touch on some numbers here in just a moment, but please, I encourage you, if you have not yet taken that survey, please do so and ask other stakeholders to do so as well. The next line, March 24th, that's today. That's the Q&A session with MSBA. The next line is the posting of the position. It was posted on March 18th and will remain open until April 17th at midnight. It's about a 4.5 week window. It is quite a bit of work to apply for a superintendency. And so we want to give folks enough time to gather the information needed to upload, not just work history, educational history, but transcripts, letters of reference, licenses. All of those need to be uploaded as part of that process. Now, MSBA posts this on our website. It is on MASA's website, the Superintendent's Association. It is on EdPost, and it is on Revelis through MSBA. That's a proprietary database developed by the Ohio School Boards Association for superintendent searches conducted by school board associations. So if someone, for example, is looking at the Kansas School Board Association site, or Michigan, or Texas, or something like that, they will see the Minnesota openings as well. And we're really pleased with Revelis. I think the reach that it gives us in terms of national advertising is quite strong. So that'll be open until April 17th at midnight. On the 14th, I do want to point out the 14th. The school board is meeting on April 14th at 6:30 p.m. for a special meeting. We'll be doing interview training with the board that evening, again, because there are a number of things they can and cannot do when interviewing in the public for a superintendent position. So we'll be talking about that, going through procedures, processes, questions, and we will be sharing the results of the stakeholder survey report. So that night, the school board will be taking a look at the voices of the stakeholders that came through in that report. We'll be discussing it. We'll be pointing out where the stakeholders align with the board's decisions thus far. If they don't align, we'll be speaking about that as well, and sharing with the school board the information that they need to make some decisions moving forward about the next steps in the process. So that night on the 14th, the board will decide, for example, how stakeholders will be involved in the interview process. We want to make sure that they have the stakeholder report in front of them before discussing their options. And I'll get to those options here in just a moment. Then you'll see that on the 17th is the deadline. The 18th, MSBA will go through all of the applications, make sure that they are complete. And then on the 19th, we will share these all with the school board. Now, one of the things that's a hallmark of our search process is that we believe the board, as the hiring authority, has the right to see all of the applications. So they will be seeing those at the same time that we are evaluating and vetting the candidates. We will come to the meeting on April 28th with recommendations, the candidates that we feel most align with what the district is looking for and what the stakeholders have shared is important to them. Now, the board can choose to accept the slate of candidates that we've recommended, or because they have seen all of the applications, there may be people that they are interested in bringing in as a finalist as well. They are welcome to ask us about our vetting process and why, for example, we're not recommending candidate C for an interview. We will answer those to the best of our ability. Keep in mind, however, that we are bound by the same data privacy laws that the school board is. So in a public setting, if asked, why not candidate C, we will do our best to explain why not. However, we cannot divulge anything specific to that candidate that might identify them. All right, it's a very challenging time because the answers may feel relatively vague. However, I do want to let you know that MSBA spends hours and hours doing a great deal of research, checking references, doing social media sweeps, pre-interviewing the candidates, talking to folks who know of them and their leadership capabilities. So by the time we come to the school board with recommendations on April 28th, we have done a tremendous amount of vetting in order to make those recommendations. And yet it is the school board's decision and they'll be deciding who they want to bring in. Now, at the conclusion of that meeting, that's the meeting where they're talking about candidate ABC. When they announce the finalists by alphabet identifier only, then those names become public. So I would say sometime the evening of April 28th, however long it takes them to deliberate and select their finalists, at that point, names will become public and you'll know who is going to be interviewed for the position in Waconia. The interviews occur on May 2nd and 3rd. We are expecting that first round to potentially contain 6 finalists. Sometimes it's fewer, sometimes it's maybe a little more, but we do spread it out over 2 nights because it is exhaustive to interview candidates for the position. And we want people to have as much attention from the board on the second day as the first. And if you do 6 interviews in one day, the last couple of candidates, you're pretty tired by that time. So we split it into 2 nights. Also on May 9th then would be round 2. Now, usually, not always, school boards will identify 3 frontrunners to bring back for round 2. Sometimes it's 2. We just don't know until the conclusion of those interviews. Now, I want to repeat, round 1 and round 2 are open to the public, and we encourage people to come and observe the interviews being conducted by the school board for this position. It's an extremely important part of the district to lead it, and I want people to know they should come and watch these. Now, live streaming often gets asked, so I'm just going to talk about it right now. Will these interviews be live streamed? I don't know yet. Some districts choose to. However, MSBA is going to recommend against live streaming the interviews, and I'll tell you why. It's not because the board is trying to hide anything at all. What we're trying to do by not live streaming is level the playing field. What happened during the pandemic when these were live streamed out of a requirement, meetings by electronic means during the pandemic, candidates who interviewed later in the process had the advantage of being able to watch the first interviews. They could write down the questions that the candidates were being asked by the school board. And because the same questions are used in each interview, it gave an unfair advantage to the candidates who interviewed later in the process. Now, I'm sure that you want Waconia to hire the best candidate, not the best prepared candidate. So for that reason, when the board discusses their interview process, we'll mention live streaming or not, and we will recommend against it, but ultimately it's up to the school board. We simply feel it's very important that every finalist has the same opportunity to see the questions for the first time when they sit down in front of the school board and not necessarily have the advantage of preparing ahead of time. So I wanted to answer the question about live streaming because I'm pretty sure that'll come up. And then finally, on May 16th, you'll see that the board will meet to approve an employment contract. Now, we are anticipating that when that is approved on May 16th, you'll have a successful search concluded, a superintendent ready to get started on July 1. That is how it almost always works, but occasionally there are bumps. It is a candidate's market right now, and there are candidates that may accept a position between the interview and the actual signing of the contract somewhere else. Candidates occasionally drop out of consideration or withdraw for their own personal reasons, and they are certainly entitled to do that. Until the contract is signed, you never are entirely certain that the candidate you've selected will be the ultimate candidate. But hopefully with a pool, applying for a district like Waconia, which is a very desirable position, we anticipate you'll have several highly qualified candidates from which to choose. So that's a review of the timeline. I'm going to pause for just another moment. John, are there any questions in the chat box about the timeline at all that I can answer?
Not right now, but I do want to clarify, our recommendation on the interviews is very strong when it comes to first round interviews for the reasons you gave. They're over 2 nights. There is less concern if a board decides to live stream the finalists because it's typically anywhere from 2 to 4. It'll be in 1 night. So there isn't an inherent advantage for any candidate. So I just wanted to clarify that, but there are no questions in the chat room.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that. All right, so now we're going to move on to the vacancy brochure for Waconia. JJ, if you could share that. Again, this is available on the website. And in here, there are a couple of key points. The first being the points of pride. On the left side of the front page, there are a lot of really wonderful things occurring in Waconia Public Schools. So this is the opportunity to differentiate yourself and describe the opportunity in ways that applicants might be intrigued. And so the points of pride are on the left side here of the brochure. And then on the right side, there are things about the community. And I have to tell you, your location is extremely desirable. And the community itself is somewhere that I think a lot of folks would want to work. So that's the front page. This is meant to be something to pique their interest. People will read this, they will dig deeper. They'll go to your website, they'll go to MDE's website, they'll look for more information specific to Waconia. But this is the marketing piece, which has been posted on MSBA, MASA, EdPost, and Revelis. Now, I do want to mention the website that MSBA has for superintendent searches is one of the most visited pages on our website. We get upwards of 10,000 hits per month on our superintendent search opening page. Likewise, MASA gets a great deal of activity for people who are interested in making the move into the superintendency, or maybe a sitting superintendent looking to move somewhere else. So it's a really good piece. There's some statistical information on the front as well as the timeline. Timeline is really important. You'll see the April 17th deadline is posted throughout this. Now on the second page at the top, there is the leadership profile. And this is something that the school board has identified. There was not time to take consideration from the stakeholder survey in order to incorporate it into hiring criteria. We're running out of runway for superintendent search season. And so if we had waited until April 3rd to put together the profile, we would have potentially lost candidates. This is the time to be advertising and solidifying the applicants. If districts start their search in April, mid-April, it's probably too late. And so the school board wisely wanted to launch this as soon as possible and get the word out. So this is the hiring criteria, which they identified as being very important in the next leader for Waconia Public Schools. Now, what is interesting is this exact list from which they chose and discussed the leadership profile is in that superintendent search survey. So when we get the results back from that, we're going to compare apples to apples with what stakeholders said was important to them in a leader with what the board has identified is important. Most of the time they align, not always. And so we're going to point out to the board if there is a lack of alignment, where that is and what that means. Stakeholder voices will be very important when the board comes to selecting their finalists. They'll keep the report in front of them from the stakeholders. That voice will be present as they weed through the applications, as will MSBA, looking for the kind of leader that best fits your district. Also, the stakeholder input will be used to help craft interview questions, both round 1 and round 2. asking questions specific to the hiring criteria identified by both stakeholders and board will help them identify who is the best leader for the district, how well do they know our district, and how well do they answer questions about the things that are important to the district. So this is the list that I would say candidates will look at to decide if it's a fit for them or not, and whether or not they choose to throw their hat in the ring. The rest is information on how to apply for the position. There's a link at the bottom to Revelis, as well as phone numbers for both John Ward and myself. We are leading the Waconia search and are happy to take calls from stakeholders and also from candidates to help see what we need to share as far as information relative to the opportunity for people to throw their hat in the ring for this job. So I'm going to stop talking about the brochure. I think it's largely self-explanatory. Again, it is on the website. Any questions in the chat box, John, about the brochure or the marketing opportunities?
No.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on, JJ, if you would, if you screen share the survey. This is the last piece I want to share before getting to your questions that is specific to Waconia. Again, this search is live right now. This survey is live right now. You can get to it from the district website. I will say, however, that not everyone wants to fill out or can fill out the survey electronically. Not everyone has a computer. Not everyone knows how to use one, nor is everyone comfortable using technology to fill this out. For that reason, these surveys have been available at the district office in hard copy since the beginning. And I would encourage you, if you prefer to fill it out with pen and paper, or you know someone who would rather fill it out, please do that on paper. Return it to the district office, and Paul David will scan them and get them back to us so we can incorporate them into the final results. What JJ is sharing right now is the electronic survey, and you'll see that the first thing we'd like you to do is self-identify. What hat are you wearing when you are filling out this survey? And then the next list says the top 6 areas of expertise. I'm going to tell you right now that these are all important. All right, the job of a superintendent is very broad and very deep. And so we recognize the importance of everything here. However, we need your help to prioritize them. What really should rise to the top when the school board and MSBA is reviewing the private data in the applications, and what should rise to the top in terms of crafting interview questions around these things. So please select your top 6. And then similarly, the next page, you'll see that these are the hiring criteria, which might mirror or might not what the school board has selected. It's a little bit longer, and I will acknowledge again, these are all important. Please, though, prioritize these for us and choose your top 6 traits or skills. There's then a yes/no question, which is real simple. It is important the next superintendent have previous experience as a superintendent, yes or no. This year, we are seeing fewer sitting superintendents moving around. We are seeing a lot of emerging leaders, people with superintendent licenses looking perhaps for their first opportunity as a SUP. They are coming in, though, with a great deal of administrative experience in large, medium, small districts. And so I think the pools have been exceptionally strong this year. I want to say one thing, in that in years past, we did have applicants try for a position in a district when they simply were not qualified. They had a license, but for whatever reason, their background experience and skill sets, they were not ready. And yet they tried. I would say they were kicking some tires to see if they could get an interview. This year, people who are applying for the position know what it entails. It has been a challenging couple of years for everyone in public education, not just superintendents, not just school board members, not just support staff, teachers. Everyone is exhausted. And so superintendents, if they want this job, are very serious about being the superintendent for Waconia. They know what it entails. And so the quality of the pool, we feel this year, is very high. And it might be a little smaller than in years past, but the quality is high. So I did want to mention that when it comes to previous experience. And then finally, there's a top 6 choice for personality characteristics, all important, but please tell us what should bubble up to the top in terms of the superintendent that's going to be hired to serve Waconia. There are then some open-ended questions here. These are questions which we used to ask in focus groups ahead of time. The quantitative survey provided this data, and in focus groups, we would gather qualitative data, such as represented by these 4 questions. I'm going to tell you a very quick story about the pandemic. When everything went online in March of 2020, superintendent searches were in full swing, and we still needed to get stakeholder input. So for a while, we did stakeholder focus groups online with the qualitative questions. We still did a survey. What we learned was really interesting. I once had a group of folks, at this point it was teachers in a district, a mid-sized district. We logged on for a focus groups. I was wanting to hear from them what they were looking for in a superintendent. Well, what happened over the course of that 45 minutes is out of 30 people, only 4 people spoke up. All right, the rest were there lurking. They wanted to see what other people said, or they wanted to ask us questions. They were very interested in how is this going to happen? When is it going to happen? And so they had questions for us, which is a little different than a traditional focus group. So we started including these questions in our online survey instead. We moved the qualitative work into the survey. 2 things happened. Responses nearly doubled. All right, and transparency increased significantly. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, when those questions are available for folks to fill out at their convenience 24/7 for 2 weeks, they can participate. And so the response rates went way up on the surveys. And then it became more transparent because it was anonymous. Anyone can fill this out at any time, and we don't know exactly who it is. I think in focus groups, sometimes people don't want to speak up in front of their peers or colleagues or neighbors, and they would watch what they say in a public setting. Now, in an anonymous survey, they can say anything, and there is no character limits on these questions. People can share as much or as little as they want to. They also do not have to fill out the entire survey. If there's only 1 or 2 questions that they want to respond to, that's all they have to respond to. Their responses are still counted. All right, so I want to be sure that people know you don't have to answer every question because it is a lot. We will get any and all responses into the results for the school board to review. So that was one of the things we found very, very helpful. And then the last piece I'll mention is it became clear that more people could participate in the survey, and it also allowed people who had barriers to participating in focus groups to be a part of the superintendent's search. Sometimes there are people that their work schedules do not allow them to come to a focus group at whatever time it might be being held. Perhaps they don't have transportation to the focus group. They might be very nervous about speaking in public. They might not have childcare. And so by removing those barriers and providing the anonymity to say whatever they want to say about the superintendent search, it became a much more equitable process. And that was, I would say, a silver lining to the pandemic. It has been a horrible couple of years, but for superintendent searches, when you're looking at continuous improvement as a goal, driving people to the survey instrument created a much more level playing field and a significant larger of people participating in the input process. So we think that was something that was actually a good lesson which arose out of the pandemic. So again, if you have not filled out this survey, please do so. It will be very important for us to hear from everyone. And then this information will be summarized for the school board. We will look for trends, patterns. We'll provide some supportive quotes for each of those trends, and the school board will hear from you. So 10 more days left in the superintendent search survey process. Please do participate and ask others to do so as well. All right, John, I'm going to stop for just a minute again. If you could let me know if there's any questions.
There are 3. I'm going to answer the first because I think you'd want me to, and then I'll throw the other 2 your way. First question is the posted salary range competitive for a position of this type in the Twin Cities Metro? Yes, it's going to be an increase for most principals in the metro area. It is going to be right in the range with large district central office personnel. It will be it's very competitive for sitting superintendents in similar sized districts or smaller districts. And it is a number. A lot will depend, and that's why the board put it the way they did, because it depends on experience and whatnot. But yeah, the question around competitiveness with that salary that's posted on the position is very competitive. The next 2, yep, the next 2. Please share again who developed the list of skills, traits, and characteristics to choose from that's on the survey, and then I'm going to give them both to you before you answer. And then the last one, I may have 3 here. Will the results of this survey be made available? And that looks like that's it.
Okay, Thank you. So as far as the traits and the characteristics that are in the survey itself, those were developed by MSBA's search services folks about 3 years ago. And they worked in concert with other search services that are conducted across the United States from other school board associations. And now they have been evolving over the last few years. Every summer, we take a good hard look at the criteria that we are including in the stakeholder survey and for the school board to look at to create that leadership profile. And again, we'll continue to update that much because continuous improvement matters. And so we'll refresh it as often as necessary to keep up with the trends in public education as far as leadership in the superintendency. As the second question there about it being made public, yes, the stakeholder summary report will be made available to the public. It will be on the district website. I would encourage everyone to read it once it is complete. We will not be sharing raw data, however, with the school board or with stakeholders. It can be overwhelming in terms of the volume of information that is shared. All of the quantitative data will be included. So you'll see however many responses there are, you'll see how many rated and ranked those in that particular order. The comments can be overwhelming because there are so many. And that's why we spend a great deal of time looking through the data to come up with those patterns, themes, and trends, and then rising up the report so people are aware of exactly what is being shared. It can be a lot of work. So yes, the stakeholder survey report will be public, and I encourage you to read it. I do want to mention something about the Waconia survey just at a moment. You have about 4,050 students. And so I'm going to give you a number. On average, we see about 12% of the number of student body, as far as responses that are coming in. So I want to give you a quick update. Now, this survey doesn't close until April 3rd, so there's still quite a bit of time here. And based on your student population, we would expect to see about 486 responses. So almost 500 responses for a district of your size. Now, I want to let you know, I checked just about a half hour ago, and you currently are sitting at 459 responses. So you are obviously going to be above average. There are going to be more stakeholders participating in the survey than the average district has. And so congratulations, and again, thank you. Thank you for that. All right, enough on the survey for now, unless there's another question, John, in the chat box.
There's a couple. Does MSBA actively recruit potential candidates, or do they solely use a passive application process? And then the last one, and I think you answered it, but it might need reiteration. The traits that are on the survey are developed by MSBA. And those are the two.
Traits on the survey are developed by MSBA, correct. And then from that, the stakeholders and the school board will select those that they feel best match Waconia Public Schools. To the first question about recruiters, I want to explain something real quick. Is MSBA facilitates the superintendent search process that is owned by the school board. School board is the only hiring authority, according to state statute, to hire and evaluate the superintendent. So we facilitate the process. We provide a lot of information so they make very informed decisions. We make recommendations. We will answer questions at any hour of the day. So we'll make sure that the school board is fully informed as they make decisions moving forward. We are not headhunters and we are not recruiters. And I'll tell you the reason not is occasionally there might be recruiting firms that have a stable of applicants that they're trying to place, or people that they feel are a good fit. And John, having been in Mounds View School District for a very long time as associate superintendent, was tapped on the shoulder many a time to apply for a position. We feel it is better to aggressively market the opportunity and allow everyone who has an interest in the position to have an equal shot at it. Now, we'll answer questions from anyone who is interested in the position. We leverage our personal networks and professional networks aggressively. So we are talking to a lot of people to make sure that they know this position is open. But will we handpick and invite people to apply? No, we do not feel that that is in the best interest of the process or the district. That, in fact, can backfire at times. So no, we do not recruit, but we aggressively market. And we have had very good responses to our positions we've been posting so far this year.
Barb,
thank you for asking.
Can I speak to that for a minute? Just to
bet.
add on, because we represent the School Boards Association, we won't ask a sitting superintendent to apply. But as Barb mentioned, in the world of superintendent searches, most people who are aspiring have a small network of people they've shared that with. And the reason for that is they don't want their current district to find out that they might be looking for another job. And it's not as if they don't like their current district. There's certain jobs they may apply for, so they tell a few people. That's where the contacts come in. we can talk to some of ours and say, what do you think of the position? Do you know anybody who might be interested? Often you'll get a yes. We'll back out, let them do the talking. And then if they come forward to us, they come forward, but we're not passive.
Correct. Thank you, John. I appreciate that clarification. And no, we don't recruiting sitting superintendents. I guarantee you, though, as John said, they're going to know that this is open. And if it feels like a fit, they're going to apply. Yep. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to move on to the questions that were submitted in advance. And I want to let you know there's a couple of categories into which these questions fall. So I'm not going to read all of them, or we would be here till probably 6 or 7 o'clock tonight. So we're going to save some time by paraphrasing and creating buckets in terms of the questions that are being asked. Initially, for example, we did have questions submitted that are for the candidates. All right, there were questions submitted around a candidate's skills in terms of conflict resolution, collaboration, trust, the role of the board versus the role of the superintendent, meeting protocols, staff support, inclusion and equity. Some very good questions submitted for candidates. I'm not going to be able to answer that today, obviously, but they will be in the mix when we talk to the school board about interview questions for both round 1 and round 2. When we do interview training, MSBA has 178 possible questions we would suggest a district consider. We will put forth our recommended questions based on the hiring criteria. Very often we have customized questions beyond those 178 so that they reflect the needs and the wants of the Waconia Public School District. So those candidate questions, thank you for them. We'll be sure that they're included in the conversation when the board starts to develop interview questions for round 1 and round 2. But there were 13 questions submitted that are for candidates and not about the search process. Then there was a group of questions submitted regarding stakeholder involvement in the interview process. And I think there were 23 questions submitted around that topic. So I'm going to answer those sort of in bulk. And then there were also 5 other questions that were not in either of those categories. So I'm going to start, first of all, with the questions that were not in those categories, just to get those off the plate. And again, I do want to thank the folks that wrote these in advance. It took some time, I'm sure. So there was a question submitted. What happens if we can't find the right candidate? Good question. So what will happen if the candidates that apply and are interviewed are not satisfactory to the school board? Because we don't want a school board to ever settle on a superintendent. All right. What will happen is we will help the school district find an interim superintendent. And there are plenty of folks who are willing to step into the shoes and be an interim superintendent for 1 year. If that happens, we will start the search again next year at no cost, probably starting the search in December or January. Because again, it's getting late in search season to start a search. So if there's not a satisfactory candidate, we'll help you find an interim to keep the wheels on the bus over the course of the next year, and then launch a much longer search starting in December or January to really hit the high season of superintendent searches. But no, it will not be something that the district will be settling for anyone. Another question is, will the public get any chance to see the candidates before a selection is made? So I'm not sure what you mean by a selection, but if it's a selection of finalists, no, the public cannot see that because again, that's private data. Only the school board members and MSBA will be able to see that information. If it's the selection of after round 1, who's going to move on to round 2, and at the end, who's going to be selected as the new superintendent? Yes, absolutely. Back to the open meeting law. The public will be able to watch all of this and definitely see the candidates before a finalist is selected and an offer is made. There was a question about the candidate pool. I think I touched on that there are still very high quality candidates in them, but they are smaller than in years past. And the pandemic's effect, I think, is the reason for that. All right, that's a combination of some questions in advance that were selected. There was one about how do you vet a candidate's vision and capacity for improving academic excellence and programming. That'll be part of the evaluation process of the applications. What we'll do and what the school board will do is they will take the hiring criteria, leadership profile, and the stakeholder summary report. And depending upon where the things such as vision and capacity for improving academic excellence, where that fits in that mix, that will be something that we are looking for if that is something that rose to the top in those questions where we ask the stakeholders to rank your top 6. So we'll continue to do that. Okay, so now I want to get to the bucket of questions that is the largest, which is stakeholder participation in the interview process and the process itself. But first, John, before I move on, is there anything in the chat box right now?
No.
Okay, thank you. Great. Well, there were a lot of questions. Again, 23 questions around stakeholder involvement in the interview process and the search overall. One of the things I do want to say is it's very apparent that there are rumors out there about this process. They are untrue and they are unhelpful. So I'm going to do my best to answer some of those where people feel it's factual when in fact it is not. And I would just ask that you please not participate in those kinds of rumor sharing or assumptions being made about the process. It is not helpful, and it's not helpful for the kids in your school district. Division, when it's created unnecessarily, does not help this process. So thank you very much in advance for your help with that. I do appreciate it. So I would say a lot of the questions that have been shared about stakeholder involvement, this one sums it up. Will stakeholders be a part of the interview process for our new superintendent? And there are about 20 more variations on that exact question, is how will stakeholders be involved in the process? And I'll tell you right now that we don't know yet. That has not been decided. And I saw quite a few questions in here. My understanding is the school board has decided that stakeholders will not be involved in the interview process. That is simply not the case. I know there was a board meeting on Monday, but the board did not decide how to include stakeholders in the final interviews. So please, that is untrue. What the board will do is at the meeting on April 14th, when we've shared the stakeholder summary report, we review it with the board verbally. You have copies. There'll be a copy on the website the next day. What we'll share with them is their options regarding the second round of interviews. And I want to use the word options because MSBA's process is able to be personalized to each individual district based upon what is best for that district. And the three options are, first of all, use the stakeholder survey report as the voice of the stakeholders in the interview process. And that's why the board wants to wait until after they've seen that to make any decisions about stakeholders moving forward. We have had a lot of districts this year choose that. And the reason they're choosing that route is because that survey is very inclusive. Everyone's voice matters. It's very equitable. There are not certain voices that are amplified over others. And so we have had that option selected by a number of districts recently. One example I might say is Stillwater. If you're curious to see a stakeholder summary report on a very recent search, we're still working with Stillwater, you're welcome to go to their website, find the superintendent search landing page, look at the stakeholder summary report, and we anticipate something similar being provided for Waconia, but your issues, of course, will be different. Based upon that survey report, the board felt very comfortable that they knew where the stakeholders stood on all of the issues facing them. And so they went that route. Another route that the board will consider is interview committees. And that would include stakeholder groups interviewing the candidates separate from the school board interview. And that is one way that districts in the past, in particular, have helped involve stakeholders in that interview process. And then the third option the board's going to consider is have stakeholders observe and comment on the school board's interviews. There's something called an audience input form, and stakeholders from different representative groups across the district will observe the interviews the school board is conducting and provide their feedback on the strengths and on the opportunities for growth for each candidate. So those are the three options that the district is going to consider on the night of April 14th. We do not know what they're going to choose, of course, but that decision has not been made. Now, I do want to say something about those three options because they all have pros and cons. One of the things that we've seen in years past is the importance of semantics. We call them interview committees, for example, or input forums or something like that. When a district appoints something called a hiring committee, that sets expectations far too high, and it's unfair to stakeholders to imply that they have a voice in the hiring process because, again, hiring authority is only the board. Also, we don't want people to rank the candidates 1, 2, and 3 or recommend to the board based on our interview or based on watching your interview. We think you should hire John Doe. Our second choice is Jane Doe. That can lead to so much resentment when a school board does not hire who the stakeholder groups perhaps suggest is their first choice. And I'm sure you can understand that. Expectation management throughout this process is really, really important. So for instance, we do ask for input on strengths and opportunities for growth. Now you want to imagine if a stakeholder group says, far and away, Jane Doe is the first choice candidate for all of us. And then when the board might hire John Doe, that could create residual resentment that never goes away. Keep in mind, a 1-hour interview, whether it's observing the board interview or participating in a stakeholder interview group, that is only a slice of what the school board has seen, because they've seen all of these applications. And so their base of knowledge about these finalists is far greater than anyone's would be from watching a 1-hour interview. They have seen these folks' answers to very specific application questions regarding Waconia. And your board came up with some really great application questions that candidates need to answer in order to be considered. They have seen letters of reference. They have seen transcripts, work history, educational history, all of that information, along with the hours and hours of vetting that MSBA has done on the candidate pool. So we want to be careful we don't set people up to be frustrated or disappointed. Those 3 options, however, will be presented to the school board, and they'll make the choice that they feel is best for Waconia. Most districts this year have chosen to go with the stakeholder report or with the observing of board interviews. Fewer and fewer districts are doing the interview committees. They can be a little problematic because the EEOC requirements for those interview committees are the same as for the school board. So we want to be careful that we're staying again within the lanes of state statute when it comes to this position. And there was a question that I wanted to just touch on quickly about the current process as it's outlined. The current process feels disrespectful and intentionally exclusionary. That is also not the case, because that decision has not been made about how stakeholders will be involved. And this person does go on to say, we've learned that MSBA has included stakeholders in the hiring of superintendents in other districts. Yes, sometimes, if that's the choice that that school board made. It is not up to us to tell a school board how to involve stakeholders. We'll outline the options, we'll discuss the pros and cons for all of them, and the board will make an informed decision moving forward from there. Our process is not prescribed. It is not a cookie cutter process. It is very much customized to each individual's needs and wants. So I hope I answered that okay, but I'm going to pause just for a minute. We're looking at about 45 minutes so far. So John, is there another question before I move on to some other things here?
Yeah, can we see the application questions the school board came up with?
Let me check with the school board on that. I'm not certain there's a reason not to share those. I think that could be something that would be very helpful, so they know what kinds of questions the school board asks. And again, this goes back to our database being Revelis, designed by a school board association, versus using AppleTrack, where the questions are all the same. We're currently working on our 30th superintendent search this search season. It's very busy, and of all 30 searches, everyone has chosen different questions or developed different questions. So thank you for asking that. I'll check with the school board, and it is something that I feel they'd be most comfortable with sharing. We'll make sure we can get that on the district website if that's something they feel is appropriate. Candidates will see them no matter what. So thanks for asking.
I would like to clarify, though, that the question is specific to the application questions, and I agree with you, Barb, because you could go in and log in as a potential candidate and see those questions. If the question is involving the questions that will be asked at the interviews, the answer is that no one will see those in advance for the reasons you gave earlier regarding a level playing field. They'll be public after the first round and after the second round, but no one would see those in advance. So I just wanted to clarify the difference between the application questions and the questions that'll be used for the interviews.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, John. Interview questions we do not like to share in advance, because again, it gives advantages to candidates who see them or find out about them, and not all candidates have that chance. So best candidate, not best prepared candidate for the interviews. Application, everyone fills those out before they can actually hit submit on their application. So thank you for asking. I did want to say one other thing. There were some questions with a lot of references to the past. In the past, we did it this way. In the past, this was the way it happened. Past selections of superintendents unfolded this way. There were quite a few references to that, as far as this is how it's always been done before. And I appreciate that. And I thank you for the question in asking that. But I'm going to go back to the fact that things change. There are always opportunities to improve the process, and continual process improvement is something we work really hard at in our search services. And because something has been done that way in the past doesn't mean it's the best way to do it moving forward this way. I do understand when people feel on the outside or excluded. There was some reference to that in here as well. That is not the intent whatsoever. We want to ensure stakeholders have an equal opportunity to participate in the process. It's actually quite inclusive by widening the opportunity for folks to participate, casting a much wider net, perhaps than doing focus groups or small interview committees, so the most people can participate as possible. So I did want to address that because I recognize that there have been searches done in your district and others that were handled differently than the process we have developed. We have, however, been really pleased with the integrity of the process that MSBA offers to districts. We don't have a horse in this race. We are objective, we are impartial, we are professional. We have all kinds of former superintendents and school board members helping us vet applications. And actually, every year we do survey our clients to ensure that we're doing what is best for these districts. And on a 4-point scale, it's kind of a long survey, but on a 4-point scale, I will share that our average rating is 3.98. And so the satisfaction rate, when all is said and done, has been very good relative to MSBA's process. During the process, it can feel bumpy, and I understand people want information and they want to be heard. I understand that and I appreciate it. So thank you very much for all the questions that were surrounding that exact topic. The bottom line is the board has not yet decided how stakeholders will be involved in round 2, and we're going to do our very best to guide them and provide them with options that make sense for Waconia. So again, thank you for those questions. Anything else, John, in the chat box before I start to wrap up?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna take one more look through the list of questions because there were a lot, and make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. All right. I think that is a culmination of the questions, but again, I apologize, I couldn't read every single one of the questions. I think we ended up with over 40, and so I don't want to spend your time reading questions to you when many of them are very similar. I do want to thank an individual who recognized with sort of the uproar over how stakeholders were not going to be involved. I want to thank someone who wrote, I was informed that the Waconia School Board may be prohibiting any and all staff, administrators, and teachers from sitting in on the superintendent interview process. If this is in fact true, is there something that can be done on behalf of our union, or is there a state law or statute in place that prevents such practices from being enforced? So I want to thank you for recognizing if this is in fact true, because that means you recognize it may not be true, and it is not. And absolutely, administrators, teaching staff, community members, students, parents should sit in on the superintendent interview process. Absolutely. Open meeting applies to every step of this search. Now, the state law and statute is bound by open meeting law and data practices law. So the way the superintendent, the way the school board in Waconia is going to conduct the search is going to be within the bounds of state law. So thank you for recognizing how important that is. No closed meetings, nothing done behind a closed session. These decisions will be made and deliberated at the board table in an open meeting. So thank you for phrasing it that way. We really do appreciate it. All right, 2 last questions. These are ones that we get asked a lot. So before we log off here, I got about 6 minutes left. There are 2 questions that get asked a lot, and they have not been asked yet in Waconia, so I'm just going to address them. The first one, John, I'm going to ask you to answer this one, okay? One of the questions we get asked a lot during a Q&A session is, are internal candidates given preference over external candidates? John, how do you want to answer that?
Well, no, they aren't, because the process is the same for everyone. In fact, so they would go through this process just like anyone else. They'd be vetted just like anyone else. And our recommendation to the board is that they can't talk about that candidate. And I want to say that because often an internal candidate will go around the community and say, I'm really excited. I'm applying. I want everybody to know. And then a community member may say to a board member, so what do you think about, John Doe? And the board member really has to say, it's MSBA, you'll have to contact them. I can't comment on any of the applicants. That feels really foreign. That feels, standoffish, but that goes back to the data privacy law. They're all candidates until they pick who they're going to interview, and then that information becomes public. But no, the process would be identical for an internal candidate.
Great. Thank you, John. And then the other question we get asked a lot, and this is something that community members really want to know, parents want to know, staff members want to know, is can we require the new superintendent to live within the district? No. Residency is not a requirement for the position of superintendent. So it's not something that anyone can ask in an interview. It is not something the board can consider when evaluating who they'd like to make an offer to. Residency for a superintendent is not required. It's not like a first responder that has to live within a certain distance of the city center. Not the case for superintendents. So they are unable to ask or consider the fact that someone may or may not move to the community. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and I'm going to wrap up unless there is one last chance, John, for questions in the chat box.
Yep, I'm just reading it now.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I'm going to bring this session to a close. So we will be done right at 5 o'clock. Okay.
Does MSBA go through with the board common look-fors on each interview question so they are ensuring a common vision for a superintendent selection?
Okay, I'm going to have you answer that because you do a lot of work with our clients in terms of questions for the interviews, whether they're round 1 or round 2. What do you think?
Yeah, we do talk about it. We look at their criteria on round 1. We write sample questions. They pick for that. We talk about look-fors. When it gets to the second round, we'll draft second round questions that fit the criteria. But we also know that boards after round 1 may hear something from a candidate that they want to follow up on. Or dig deeper on. So the round 2 questions are typically deeper. So we'll talk about look-fors, but we'll also tell them that if you want to ask, so say they bring back 3, if you want to ask a deeper probing question from candidate, John Doe, you can do that, but then you have to ask it of the other 2 finalists as well, again, to ensure an open or a fair level playing field. But that's where the stakeholders, round 2 often is a place where you can take and go dive a little bit deeper on stakeholder survey input, especially where it differs perhaps from what the original criteria were. But yes, we don't provide a rubric if that's the question, but we will say this is what this question intends to get at, and then they have an idea of they either agree or disagree. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for taking that one, John. I appreciate all your work on interview questions as well. So finally, in closing, I really just want to thank you very much for your passion for the education of students in your district, for your interest in the superintendent search. Clearly, there is a lot of interest in Waconia about the superintendent search, and there's a lot at stake. We want to recognize that the education of the children in your district is paramount, and it's something that we're going to do our absolute best in working with the school board to ensure that you find the very best candidate for Waconia Public Schools. So thank you. Thank you very much for your passion for the education there. Please remember the deadline to fill out that survey is April 3rd. And I do hope you found this session helpful. Again, the link will be on the district website beginning tomorrow afternoon if all goes well with YouTube. And we would like everyone to watch this at your convenience, rewatch it. And please know you can reach out to John or myself with questions about the search process at any time. Candidates and stakeholders are welcome to call us. Our contact information is on that second page of the vacancy brochure. So thank you for being with us. We're going to wrap up. It is almost 5 o'clock, and I want to thank you again for being here. Please take care, and we'll look forward to working with you on the search for Waconia. Goodbye, everybody.